So welcome everyone to Experiencing No Self session 11, which I'm calling Nothing and Everything, which seems like a strange title, but hopefully becomes self-explanatory as I move into it. So really we've been exploring now for quite a while the notion of emptiness or no self, transcending the ego, or the ego, identification with the ego, falling away. So we've really kind of been moving from the notion that we're somebody, right? An ego with all these wants, desires, and so forth, to really kind of being a nobody. So we've moved from being a somebody to being a nobody, you could say. And so it's, when the notion that I am something goes, then the notion that I am nothing arises. I am no thing. And the notion of emptiness can arise. And of course, this doesn't arise from the mind. From the mind's point of view, there are only things. So we discover more through our realizations and seeing directly from our experience that we are no thing. That's why I entitled this Experiencing No Self, because it's not something the mind grasps. It's something that is seen through our experience. So we go from thinking that we're the ego, that we're this mind, this body, to seeing that we are the awareness that knows the ego, the mind, the body, right? So we can explore this. We can say, oh, this is not what I am, but I am the awareness that knows these things. And when we explore this no thingness that I am, we discover that we don't have limits and that we're ever present. So we discover that we're not limited, and in a sense, we're infinite, we're not finite. So we're really transcending this attachment or identification with what for most people and go through their life thinking this is who and what I am, right? I'm these thoughts, I'm these motions, I'm these wants, these desires, this pushing away of what we don't want. So we've and I hope you've come along with me on this journey as we've started to kind of empty out these identifications. And they don't go easily, right? We've talked about this. They don't go easily, but there's most likely a continuing emptying out process that goes on. Can get very subtle. It can also get painful when we discover where we're really identified. And I mentioned how we can be really identified with this whole notion of being a spiritual seeker, of wanting enlightenment or wanting insights and realizations. And then they can also be very subtle. So we really begin this journey by being a witness, kind of a witness. We practice choiceless awareness as we see these things just arising and falling away. And this taking the stance of the witness allows us to kind of see everything's just impermanent. It's arising, falling away. It's unsatisfactory. It doesn't bring, true happiness. It might bring some temporary happiness, but it's insubstantial, unsatisfactory, impermanent. So we start to disidentify with these things that we're noticing, that we're witnessing. We see how craving and wanting things to be a particular way causes suffering. So we've in a sense seen emptiness. We've started to see the emptiness aspect, but the emptiness is not the totality of who we are. It can feel very liberating. It's kind of as the Buddha called it, it's kind of like unburdening or lifting a burden off of our backs. But eventually we start to sense a kind of disconnect from the richness of life, right? From the richness of existence. Start to disidentify with all these things that one was identified with. Start to go, oh, well, so what do I do now? I used to have all these things that I that the ego enjoyed doing, and now I'm disidentifying. So now what? And you can start to feel this kind of disconnect with the richness of life. So we're kind of now moving from I'm nobody, or I am no thing, to I am everything. So we've kind of gone from I'm somebody or something to I am nobody or nothing to I am everything and everybody. In a very literal sense. A very literal sense. I've got some things about letting go of the witness as well. Right? There's really we start to see there's no distinction between the witness and what we're witnessing as we go through this process. There's no distinction between awareness and the objects of awareness. So we also start to let go of that. But I won't say too much about that. Yeah. So the self can identify with the ego. We've seen that, which makes us feel separate and small and limited. And we've seen this as we've gone through these various practices, right? The self, how the self identifies with those aspects, and how when the true nature is seen, that a disidentification can arise. The self can also have a capacity to identify with unity or infinity, right? So we're really moving the self to identifying with that, as opposed to the self identifying with a very limited ego. And this is a profound and liberating sense of self. So it's not the highest form of reality. We're not experiencing no self. We're experiencing no identification with the ego. Because you don't experience limitation in this higher form of self, it's also often mistaken for no self. So it's still a higher level duality, right? It's still a duality, but eventually even that falls away. So having said all that, I've given you some context. We'll start with the quote by Nisargadatta, and we've heard this quote many times here. Wisdom is knowing I am nothing, love is knowing I am everything, and between the two my life moves. That's Nisargadatta. I've heard it also expressed as, when I look inside, I know I am nothing, When I look outside, I know I am everything. And between the two, my life moves. So however, whatever one grabs you, this quote's been, recorded in both ways. And we've been exploring this. We've seen the emptiness of the egoic self. You are not the idea of yourself, but you're something larger. So this is emptying out process has gone on. Our identities have ebbed away, including our spiritual identities. And as I said, it can feel like we're entering a void of nothingness. Right? A void of nothingness. It can be scary for the ego, right? Perhaps you've experienced this. But we're also seeing our essential self as this happens. It's kind of like an emptying out process. If you can think of, all these identities and attachments emptying out, leaving space for your essential nature to kind of fill in. Because when you're all contracted and engrossed in noise and movement, there's really little space for consciousness or your essential nature to fill in. It's wanting to. The truth is, if you can put it that way, is always revealing itself. But if we're so engrossed in our identities, it's very difficult. So this emptying out process. And so when you see that you're nothing, all that movement just stops, and truth can really reveal itself. So there's an ebbing or a transcending of the ego, but when it truly falls away and everything just stops, including our spiritual struggles, truth can reveal itself. And you don't need a big spiritual experience for this to happen. It's not like, you need to have these big visions or big spiritual experiences. It's just your true nature revealing itself at the moment that the ego stops. So you start to see that you're absolutely nothing and you're simultaneously everything. So I start with the nothing. So for 10 weeks, I've been taking you through a process. If you've been with me on this, likely a painful process of seeing that you're nothing. So why didn't I start with you're everything? And the reason is that the ego loves the idea of being everything. So the danger in starting with I am everything is that the ego latches onto it and becomes an ego that thinks it's everything. And what the process I'm working with you here is to empty out the identification with the ego. And once that's happened, truth can fill in. And you can see that, I'm everything. Simultaneously. So the seeing that you are nothing kind of liberated you from all the ideas you have about yourself, right? So that fresh experiences, if you want to call them that, kind of fill in. So what is seeing that you are everything? What does that mean? So when we experience kind of this unity or oneness with everything, you could put it that way. So we kind of know nothingness by subtraction, right? I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not the body, I'm not thoughts, not emotions, I'm not my wants and my likes and dislikes. I'm not, it's just this kind of process of subtraction, not my perceptions, and so on. So we started this process by seeing what we are not. So unity is not seen by seeing what I am. I'm not this or I'm not that. It's experienced as I am everything. I am everything. I'm not separate. There's no other being. It's kind of a non-dual experience, you could say. So it's an actual lived experience that there isn't anything apart. There isn't even anything apart that you need to unify with because you're already unified. And it's not like we're trying to unify two things. There's no two. It's already unified. You know, we've looked at the whole notion of dependent co-arising, how we're just so interconnected that there's not two. You wouldn't exist if everything didn't exist. So we're experiencing this reality. So for most of us, this reality is experienced through the heart. And what I call the true heart. Other people have called it the heart of awareness, the heart of hearts, the spiritual heart. Big heart. I like big heart too. I kind of go back and forth between big heart and true heart. And it's not true in the sense of versus false. It's just true in the sense of it's your essential heart. That might even be a nicer, truer way of putting it, your essential heart, the big heart. For most of us, this sense of everything is experienced through this big heart. So it's not the emotional heart that we usually think of when we think of heart. When we hear the word heart, we think of, emotions, right? And but rather it's true heart. It's never closed. It doesn't open and close like our emotional heart. Doesn't need to, it's not armored because of traumas in our life, difficulties in our life. It's always there. And the true heart intuitively perceives. It's what intuitively perceives this deep unity with everything around you. So it's what we perceive through. So we experience unity as an intuitive way of perceiving. So when we're open, not identified with the ego, not identified with what's arising and passing away in the emotional heart. We have a profound connection with our true heart. And through that, we perceive this unity. Yeah. So our heart can get covered over, our emotional heart, right? As I said, due to tragedies in our lives and so on. But that you can just allow that to be. We're really connecting with something much deeper here. And So for me, it sometimes feels like actually my actual chest is open, like the bone is like the breastbone is open, and the heart, the space is just there to be connected with, and in connecting. Sometimes it feels like rays of light coming from the chest area. So two kind of images that often arise when I connect with this aspect of being. And of course, the unity resonates through the entire body, but there's a kind of a sense of a primary location of where it resonates in the heart space. And really, I want to really get into this more next session. I had it into this session, but then I realized I try to do too much sometimes in one session. So I really want to sort of paint the picture. And then next session, we'll get into some practices in opening connecting with, I should say, the true heart. So just a little more about this this unity. It's really an absolute intimacy with everything. I love that way of putting it. An absolute intimacy with everything. And I get that from the Zen teacher, Dogen, who's quoted as saying, "It is the absolute intimacy with the 10,000 things." And whenever you hear the Buddhists say the 10,000 things, they're really saying everything, right? For some reason, 10,000 is the number that means everything. And so Dogen is saying it's absolute intimacy with everything. That for me really paints the picture for the mind. Because we're all, well, this whole process is kind of me translating things that the mind can use in a way so that it can then be experienced. Mind doesn't understand it. There's a translation process for the mind that allows you to step into the experiencing of it. So, so we're so intimate with everything that they're experienced as extensions of our own being. No separation. By own being. And by being, I'm not talking about the ego, as you know. So it's not about the ego finding out that it's everything. Again, that would be dangerous, actually. So it's intimacy in that sense of an extension of our being. So it's intimacy, love for no reason. There's no wanting, or there's no wanting to be loving, or wanting to be compassionate, or wanting peace. Right? It's just intimacy for no reason. So the egoic wanting is not present in this. Again, why I left it later. So there's an uncaused sense of peace and love. It's just uncaused. So there's, in this connection, there's no denial that there's oppression in the world, that there's difficulties and suffering in the world. In fact, there's a more intimate experience of it, given that there's no separation. Because the ego gets overwhelmed by this. But the true heart doesn't. So we're experiencing everything in this more intimate way. The whole thing. As Rumi said, Rumi the poet said, love is the whole thing, and we are only the pieces. Love is the whole thing. So we're connecting with everything, the whole thing, and we're a piece of this whole, of this one. So when the ego falls away, we can actually intuit that there's actually only one. There's no separate self. But we're totally and intimately interconnected. And we know this at the deepest level of our being, that there's no separation. This is really an important part of experiencing no self. Right? It's this experiencing no self process that I'm taking you through. It's not just about falling out of identification with the ego, the mind, and the body. It's not just about discovering our unconditioned nature. It also involves coming back into the world of form and bringing forth a complete intimacy with the totality of existence. So it's both. It's not just about falling out of identification. It's this, coming back into life, back into form, our humanness, and coming back into that form of humanness in this connected, intimate, and loving way. So we're waking up, we talk about awakening, we're waking up from our conditioned existence, our ego identification, our identification with ego, mind, body. But it doesn't mean our mind and body are worthless, right? We're not discounting our humanness, our form, which is right. It's our physicality, our minds, our bodies. We're not discounting that. It just means that our identity isn't housed there. Our identity isn't housed in the mind and the body and the ego. When the identity is housed there, it's very limiting. Right? Our true potentiality can't flower when we're limited in that way, limited to those identifications. We miss the whole creative aspect of the infinite, of the whole. This unlimited potentiality. So this is a direction I'm pointing in now. It's a bit of a, I guess, a 180, you could say. And just kind of watch and see, does the ego grasp onto this? Oh, I want to be everything. So it's in the past there were most traditions had secret teachings. teachings, meaning teachings that aren't revealed until somebody gets to a certain point along with the teachings. And the reason for it is teachers didn't want to put things out there that egos could grasp onto, such as notions of, I am everything. Of course, now everything's in books and on the internet. You can Google, this most secret Tibetan teachings, and you'll get they're all on there. So that can be a good thing, but it can also be can also cause some difficulties. So I just put the fine print as I engage in these teachings with you, is to really be aware of egoic grasping onto these as a project for the ego. That might come out. It's not a problem. It doesn't mean it's not a bad thing. It's just to be noticed that this is something that the egos desire. Right? It's something that egos desire. And there's nothing wrong with the ego desiring to be everything. But we're taking this in a different way. Yeah. So even when we say, I'm just going to kind of sort of tie an even tighter non-dual bow around what I've been saying, if you know what I mean, like, because even saying that we're everything, we're still talking about things. So even I am everything is not actually true. And we'll get, so I'm giving you a glimpse of what comes down the road even further. We're assuming things are real. Right? We're going from first, I am these things, to I am none of these things, to I am all of these things. So what are these things referring to? Right? So saying I am everything is not true. It's truer than I am nothing. And I am nothing is truer than I am something. So we get closer to the truth of our experience. But eventually we drop the notion of things. Awareness does not experience things. It's just, how can I put it? It's just experiencing the perceiving of things. Awareness is just experiencing the knowing of things. It just experiences knowing. So what you're left with, you could say, is I am present. Perhaps, but then there's still an I, and there's a notion of presence. So there's got to be a notion of non-presence. So what we're left with is the discovery that the mind can't actually know this. I'm kind of leaving you with this because this isn't something the mind is ever going to grasp. But we will journey through and journey on with discoveries around I am everything, which is connecting with the unity of everything. So I'll just leave it open for some questions. I've covered a lot of territory and perhaps a lot of ideas. And as I said, we will explore this in an experiential way. So there'll be less ideas as we move forward. And they're really going to be heart-centered practices, and practices that you can do while you're meditating, practices that you can do while you're actually out in the world. right? Because they're very, I've found, at least from my practices, that they kind of resonate more actually when I'm out in the world with people than sitting in solitude, because you're connecting, right? So it's really kind of opening that heart and connecting. Yeah.
Hello, Stephen. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to wrap my intellectual mind, I suppose, around the concept of intimacy without feeling. That, my head is like, what? What do you mean intimacy without feeling? Or like, how can you be interconnected to the whole planet and the oppression and the genocides and the pain and not feel the pain? Is that because you're now tuning in to an awareness without feeling it? That's the part that I'm like, what? Really? We can be interconnected? But then, because you said that you can feel it without it being painful. So I'm just trying to wrap myself I'm just trying to wrap everything around that concept of the intimacy without feeling it, being interconnected with the universe and not feeling the pain. So that's what I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, how can I put this? The big heart, in the way that it connects, is totally connected and therefore intimate. So the pain, there's no pain of the other. There's no, in a sense, sympathy for the other. There's no need for empathy, even, because that implies another. It's just your pain. It's your suffering. But it doesn't overwhelm. It can overwhelm the emotional heart, but it doesn't overwhelm the big heart. And you can actually see this when you're truly connecting in that way, with people who are in pain. So it doesn't mean there's no tears. Like the humanness still responds. It doesn't mean there's no sadness, there's no grief. It doesn't mean there's no even anger, right? But it's not egoic anger, egoic grief. Yeah. Does that? It's hard to explain it to the mind, right? Because the mind don't. I think as we move through the practices, and open in this way, and there's a certain amount of transcending the ego, because the ego will insert itself in the process as well. But yeah, there's that connection. So your form is connected. You're connecting from the point of view of form and formless, from the infinite and the human. So the human is still connecting from the eyes of the infinite. That's another practice that what we're going to do is viewing oppression in the world and difficulties and genocide and so on from the eyes of the infinite, right? Through the eyes of the infinite. It's a better way to put it. So there's no compassion fatigue. There's no overwhelming. Right? How can the infinite be overwhelmed? But it's the egoic state that gets overwhelmed and experiences compassion fatigue. I tried to teach this to social work students. I completely lost them, but I think because I didn't bring them through a process of disidentifying with the ego and the mind body. But that's a key, the key underpinning to it is the disidentification process is a key underpinning.
Thank you.
So perhaps a little bit connected to what you want to just raised as a point. I went back to something you said almost at the end, which was that, well, the mind really can't conceive of this or can't understand this. And that immediately made me feel like, phew. And in fact, I felt a resonance with that, or a connection. I thought, of course, the mind can't connect with this. This is something we know, something we sense, something we intuit and we feel into. So perhaps there's a portal there somewhere to really kind of, I don't know, not understanding, because the mind can't understand this, but we can feel it and know it through experience, is my sense from what you said. And I think for me anyway, when you said that, I thought that's fantastic, because I don't need to worry about my mind. I feel like I sense that I know what you're talking about, and there's a portal to it, to identifying with it, which really short circuits the mind, I guess. Maybe that helps.
Yeah, the don't know mind, or beginner's mind. The mind. Do you know what I mean when I say the mind cannot know the nature of reality? So we our minds think they know reality, right? But really, all we're doing is perceiving through senses of touch, taste, smell, sight. And those are being translated in the brain into experiences. Well, what on earth does that have to do with reality? Like, we don't know what. All we're getting is this sense experience. How does that relate to the nature of reality? Just all that relates to is the nature of our sense experiences. We're only perceiving the world through these sense experiences. This really hit me, and it's sorry for perhaps the grossness of the story, but I was. It's not a pleasant story, but it really struck home something for me. We had some friends up at the cottage, and somebody had their morning constitution, and then I went right in, and it's just this little tiny cottage bathroom, and of course there was this odor, right, from somebody having just gone to the bath, excrement into the toilet, and so I went in and I stood there and I thought, that's a smell. And I thought, that the mind is saying that is a unpleasant odor. What hit me is, that's not an unpleasant odor. Really, the nature of that is just odor. To reality, it's just an odor. It's not a pleasant or unpleasant odor. It was funny, as soon as the mind kind of went, the big mind kind of went, it's just odor. It's not pleasant, it's not unpleasant. I could actually be with just the odor. So that, for me, that really, it brought home this notion of we just construct reality in our minds, based on these sense doors that we have and interpretations and perceptions of what comes in the sense doors, all this conditioned reality, you could say. You're really sensing into the unconditioned reality, the true reality, which we can't perceive through our minds. It cannot be perceived, cannot be known through the mind, because the mind cannot know the nature of reality, the true nature of reality. So, play with that in your experience. It doesn't have to be next time you go into a stinky bathroom, but just when you're, even a rose, it could have been a rose. For me, it was a stinky bathroom, but it could have been a, beautiful, or anything, any kind of sense experience. You're just label, perception, label, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, all these processes just going on where we construct reality. So that's what I mean when I ended by saying the mind cannot know the nature of reality, of things, of no things.
I when you just spoke about that story about your cottage experience in the small bathroom, that I can really relate to that experience with just from doing my own meditation and mindfulness practice, like for several years now. Because I've had a lot of struggles with depression and anxiety. That's why I started doing meditation. And I still get symptoms in my body of anxiety, but I don't really identify with them now. They're just there for the most part. And say over the past year or so, I just have so much more energy, and I really attribute it to the mindfulness, noticing things kind of moment to moment without judgment. And it's the judgment and the ego coming in that it's really draining. I think that's why I feel like it's very draining. And that's, I have a friend who struggled with anxiety for a long time. And this is I wanted to add, this is where the question comes in, because especially with anxiety, this is a human thing, but in anxiety, it's even worse, is that you're always thinking about, okay, if only I had this thing, then I'd be happier, thinking about the future and having, the way things should be, and trying to, she's convinced that she just needs to move to a new house and everything's going to be, she's going to be happy, and so trying to explain, okay, that maybe that's good, but also kind of happiness is kind of in the present moment. That's where it comes from. We have the happiness right now. How do you initiate that conversation with someone? Because she was, for me, it's like I have that felt experience, right, from doing it enough, practicing enough, but she doesn't at all. So she's just well, I don't buy into your philosophy. But for me, it's not philosophy. It's actually, it feels like the nature of reality for me, like this. I was very respectful of her experience, but I mean, how do you kind of speak to someone that's never really done mindfulness or a meditation practice with, without kind of alienating them, because it's like saying, well, I've had this experience, and well, they can say, well, that's just your experience. Why the heck should I do that? It's totally subjective. I'm just wondering if you had any comments on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Could do a series of talks on that one. Yeah. It's I can tell you how I do it. I ask questions. That's all I do. And I think there's an attitude or a understanding that people are a lot of acting out of egoic consciousness, right? For the most part. And that there's nothing wrong with that. That's still the infinite living through a human a being. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. This really struck me. I was at, and I'm going to talk about this more next week, because there's more to the story, but I went to get my blood test done and did the lineup down the hall thing, right? Not knowing that you could go online and register for a spot. So there's all these dynamics of some people have appointments, all the old people and people with mobility issues didn't have appointments, me being one of them. And just this whole, and just the suffering, people that are ill, people, just, you can just, the chaos, the staff that are overworked and stressed because the job's stressful anyway, and now COVID's on top of it, and just this, it was just this human kettle of suffering, of egos. And I would talk to people, but I couldn't go up to somebody and say, none of this is actually real. This, this isn't happening. Or if you just let go of impatience and, feel impatience in your body, you'll be totally fine. Or, you could just, none of that would have any, well, I could just listen to their, impatience, to their suffering, ask a question perhaps. Could I get you a chair? Would that make you more comfortable? Things like that. And just, yeah, and not, there's no judgment, right? It's just the infinite living as them in that moment. The fact that you're on this kind of path, some kind of grace has just befallen you. You didn't do anything to be here. Something just sunk through no effort or fault of your own. You've just, consciousness has kind of poked through in some way, unexplainable and mysterious. But just, and for somebody else it hasn't, right? Or at least in that moment. Maybe it has in other moments, because we've all had moments of egoic, what do you call it? They call them multiple hindrance attacks. I call them kind of, egoic overload attacks or something, right? Where the ego is just run amok, right? We still have those moments. And so you can kind of happens and you kind of go, oh, that happens. And I have children and they're, going through the usual struggles. Yeah, if we get this job, I'll be happy. If I get a house, I'll be happy, and so on. And it's, those are things that, I asked our daughter, what if you get this job that you really want, and you don't like it. How would that feel? Because that's possible too. It's possible too, right? Or, you know, this just kind of broaching those kinds of questions. My kids are kind of used to it as well, but so there's a, you know, because they've been listening to it since they were infants in a way. But yeah, just I think the perspective of you know, accepting that that's also the infinite living through all beings, right? And there's no separation. You know, non-separation means when you look at a tree, you say, "Oh, that's me." You look at a rock, that's me. You look at another human being, that's me. To the same extent, you know, when you get in front of a mirror and you look in a mirror, you look at that image and you say, "Oh, that's me." You know, like that's, you know, that's me. Maybe you don't now, you kind of go, that's the body manifesting. But it's a, you know, and there's common use of that, you know, the word, that's me. You're everything. So you're even that being, you know, you're even that person that's struggling. That's you. There's no separation. That's true intimacy, right? So you're also intimate with all these manifestations that are appearing around you. Are you? So that's what we're going to be exploring, is how we can feel into that. Because I can sit here and say it over and over again, but it's not gonna, the mind just kind of could go, "Oh, that sounds groovy, yeah." You know, I get that oneness sounds cool. You know, I've you know, read some books about oneness and some fairly famous people that talk about oneness, but it's really, we've got to experience it. And this is where our, you know, the felt, you know, we can use that felt experience as sensing into the openness. And the other part of the story that I'll share next week is I really went in with the intention to have the wide open heart, because I knew going in that this would be a different, you know, a different world, right? With different new people and people with lots going on. And let me tell you, lots more went on, and I'll explain sort of all kinds of things happened that were quite unexpected, that really kind of stirred up things that made it a very, well, it was a very rich experience in so many ways, even though there was so much going on. And in so many ways, a lot of suffering going on, a lot of pain. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
I would just say just 10 seconds and probably staying the obvious. I'm thinking that in experiencing the non-separation, mothers have an advantage. That's the closest thing I can think of, you know, relating to another entity, so to speak, but really being one. I mean, mothers at the time of pregnancy. That's what I mean. The one having the child in the womb. It's probably an obvious thing, but it just crossed my mind just now.
Yeah, how biology plays into this, right? How biology plays into seeing this, experiencing this, how psychology plays a role in how we see this and experience this. And there can be differences, definite differences between different genders, non-binary, as well as binary, cultures, peoples as well. Yeah. Psychology, our psychological makeup as well will play a big role in it. Okay, so the time is there, and yeah, thank you for your participation and your dedication to this practice. And I hope you enjoy the next leg of this journey as we start exploring the different, the I am everything aspect of this equation. I'm excited about exploring this with you. Excitement is arising, which is fine, right? It's not like we have to be dull. Woohoo! It's fun. And keep working with the ego identifications that come up, because we're moving on to the next step. That's going to continue to unfold, and they'll get, as I said, they'll get subtler and near the end painful, and just keep what Let me put it this way. When they get real painful, that you're at the cusp, right? Because your biggest identifications are the ones that you're holding on to the tightest. And those are the ones that are there's going to be some discomfort. Let me put it lightly for you. There's going to be some, so, welcome, see that as an opportunity. Oh, wow, this is hard. I never, I didn't know I was getting myself into this. That thought might have, this is hard to just welcome it as, okay, this is this is what's unfolding. Consciousness trying to become aware of itself. The ego is getting out of the way, and it's painful for ego to get. Just welcome it in that kind of, even though it is painful, and you really have to open to it, right? You have to open to it to go through it. If there's resistance, and you may step back. People engage in all kinds of ways to keep that little bit of identity that they might have intact. Okay, so I'll just put that out as well, because that process is going to continue to unfold as well as we move through this. So be well, everyone. Take care, and I hope to see you all next week.
Good night, everyone.